don't want anyone knowing my name. I don't want to go anywhere with my mom because she might yell my name out over the grocery aisle or something.
There is nowhere I feel safe. Nowhere. Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you?
More than a year after Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman testified about how their lives were turned upside down following the 2020 election, a federal jury has decided Rudy Giuliani should pay millions for defaming them. Hello, I'm Stephen Romo in for Gadi Schwartz, and this is Stay Tuned Now. Today's verdict orders Giuliani to pay $148 million in damages to Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, the two Georgia election workers he accused of election fraud. Giuliani was in court earlier when that verdict was reached and spoke to the media afterwards, calling the amount of damages absurd and saying he plans to appeal.
Possibly we'll move for a new trial. Certainly we'll appeal. The absurdity of the number merely underscores the absurdity of the entire proceeding, where I've not been allowed to offer one single piece of evidence in defense, of which I have a lot.
Now, both Freeman and Moss testified earlier this week, talking about the constant harassment and threats to their safety that came after those false allegations against them. And today saying there are others who still need to be held accountable.
I want people to understand this. Money will never solve all of my problems. I can never move back into the house that I call home. I will always have to be careful about where I go and who I choose to share my name with. I miss my home, I miss my neighbors, and I miss my name.
NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley joins me now for more. Ryan, this is a significant amount in damages. I think a lot more than many people expected, including Giuliani. It's also more than Freeman and Moss were even seeking, right? So how did the jury come to that amount?
Yeah, so the punitive damages was really a lot of this. And essentially the way it works is you can basically go up to 4 times amount of what you're finding in the compensatory damages. And then there's also $20 million each for each of them for infliction of emotional damage. So it very quickly gets up there. But, you know, Giuliani's lawyers started this week by saying that inflicting the high enough penalty would be the civil equivalent of the death penalty for Rudy Giuliani. And essentially what the jury said was, we'll take it. And we'll take it more than 3 times over, because that's really what they did here by inflicting this damage of $148 million, a really significant penalty for him.
And a question a lot of people are asking, Ryan, does Giuliani have the means to pay them, considering he's already facing other financial problems, being sued actually by other attorneys over payment? What will happen if he can't pay?
That is the big question here. You know, I think the case sort of to look to is the Alex Jones case, where he recently settled with the families of the Sandy Hook killings, right? So they ended up getting this massive finding against him, but then he settled it for a lower amount, which is still in the tens of thousands of millions of millions of dollars there, or rather, tens of millions of dollars there. But basically, you end up with that settlement, and then on the back end, that gets paid over somehow. So really, Rudy Giuliani, if he continues to still have this sort of media career, is going to be fueling potentially this verdict down the line. But obviously the first thing that's going to come up is an appeal process, and Rudy Giuliani is going to be appealing this because he still believes these conspiracy theories that he spread about these women. Even today he was saying that there was support for that, which is really only just sort of clicking more on his tab. They could potentially go after him for even more for doubling down on those lies he told about them back in 2020.
And a bit surprising to hear when his attorneys seem to be admitting that that is not the case. They weren't really on the same page. Also wanted to ask you, Ryan, what do you think this verdict can tell us about what we can see holding those responsible for making these allegations about election fraud?
that sometimes the civil process is quicker than the criminal one, right, and can be more effective in some measures, because if you look at the Fox News verdict, that had significant penalties and implications for them after you had Dominion voting systems going after them for the false claims that they met against them and having that enormous verdict against them. So that's really a way that people can pursue justice in these matters, and that there are consequences for these lies that were spread 3 years ago now that led up to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol.
Some big dollar signs, both with Dominion and with this. All right, Ryan Riley, thanks so much for that reporting. Millions across the East Coast are in for a wet and windy weekend. A storm making its way along the eastern seaboard is moving through Florida right now, leading to concerns of flooding for parts of the state that's already prone to seeing that. And check out how it's been today ahead of those downpours that are expected tomorrow. Conditions setting up to create rough and dangerous surf, along with some potential neighborhood flooding. And if that wasn't bad enough for you, wind gusts could also reach up to 45 miles per hour. And Florida is just at the very start of this storm's path, making for a very wet weekend for pretty much the entire East Coast. NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns is standing by with what to expect from this storm. But let's start with Gadi Venegas joining us from Hollywood, Florida, with more. Gadi.
Stephen, we've been getting a lot of that wind throughout the day as we wait for this heavy rain that is forecasted for the weekend. Here in Hollywood at the beach, they even installed tiger dams, which are used to keep some of the water that could come from a high tide and could enter some of these neighborhoods. And if you look at all of South Florida and Central Florida, there's a lot of communities right by the ocean that could be affected by the tide and, of course, by this possibility of flooding. Now, there's also an alert that's been issued in a lot of these beaches because of the possibility of rip currents. All of these towns have a lot of tourists that usually make their way out here during these days close to the holidays because they're on vacation, of course, trying to escape the weather that's much colder north of us. But it's been a chilly weekend. It's been windy, and of course these temperatures have dropped quite a bit, but not as cold as it is in other parts of the country, but pretty cold for South Florida. We're going to hear from one of these tourists who was visiting and spoke to me earlier today.
It is what it is. It's windy out here, but it feels good to me. Coming from New Jersey right now, it's about 30, 35 degrees there, so this is awesome.
Now, authorities are worried about that possibility of rain that could cause flooding. The landscape in South Florida is flat, so it's quite difficult when we get a lot of rain to have it drain fast enough. To get an idea, the city of Fort Lauderdale, that is just north of us, has already issued information indicating that they can get 3 inches of rain in a 24-hour period and drain that out of the way. If they get more than 3 inches, then it could be a problem for those drains. And different communities across South Florida have emergency pumps that have been sent out to help with that possibility of flooding. Meanwhile, we had events all throughout the weekend in all of the state, including Central Florida, that had to get canceled because we have this storm coming in. So a lot of holiday plans were canceled. People will have to stay in and wait for this forecast as the rain makes its way to this part of the country, Stephen.
Yeah, Gadi, it's something people don't want to see anytime, especially right before a holiday. You mentioned those events being canceled. Neighborhood flooding, though. Someone's house flooding right before the holidays also seems pretty awful. Is there anything being done, any preparations to try to stop that from happening?
So I think a lot of people are going to be remembering what happened a few months ago. Fort Lauderdale got a lot of rain in a short period of time. Even the airport was under a few inches of water. So we know how bad it can get when we get too much rain too fast. So it's really local authorities that have sent out those pumps. The way the drain system works out here in South Florida, because it's flat, we have canals. We have a lot of canals across the communities. These canals have been prepared to get some of that extra water. So the pumps will help move the water to the canals, and eventually gravity sends that water out into the ocean. But there is a challenge because a lot of the wind that we're getting is coming from the coast and west going inland, at least on this east part of the Florida peninsula here, or this stretch of Florida. It could be a challenge because those canals that bring the water back into the ocean might be going against the wind. But we'll just have to wait and see how much rain we actually get here over the weekend.
One of those wait and sees. All right, Gadi Venegas, thank you. All right, now let's get to the forecast as we track where that storm is headed, plus the possibility for rain on the West Coast next week. Here's meteorologist Bill Cairns.
Well, good evening to you, Stephen. This is another weekend with another big storm going right up the eastern seaboard. A lot of people's holiday plans, their shopping plans, travel plans. It's going to be a little chaotic, and everyone's going to have to kind of plan around this storm system. And then we also have a new storm that we're going to get to coming into the West Coast. But first, here's the ingredients. We have a storm in the middle of the country and a brewing storm in the Gulf. This is going to be over Florida come Saturday. It's going to combine with this storm by the time we get to Sunday and then to Monday. That's when it becomes actually a more powerful, bigger storm. So let's talk about the impacts. Let's first go into Saturday. That's the day that Florida is going to have its biggest concern for heavy rain, isolated urban flooding, and also the potential for some severe storms. Now, during the day, when we typically get severe storms, we're not really going to be watching the storm either being close enough or because of the rain, the air mass is going to be kind of cool. It's not going to be what we call unstable enough. But then as we go throughout the overnight hours, as the storm actually gets closer and over the top of Florida during probably maybe from like midnight to 6 a.m., that's our best chance of severe storms. That's why we got everyone from I-4, Tampa to Orlando, southwards, 14 million people in this what we call a slight risk. And the thing that gets your attention is a few nocturnal tornadoes are possible. Then we get into Sunday. Severe weather risk at that point is over with. Then we're just concerned with coastal flooding, especially the high tide cycle early from Charleston, especially about maybe around 10 or 11 a.m. And then we're going to work our way up the coast. The Cape Fear River is going to have some serious water concerns all the way up here to Carteret County and out through the Outer Banks. Then inland, it's going to be a heavy rain threat, also some gusty winds. I'm not really expecting power outages. Then by the time we get to Sunday night into Monday, that huge rain shield lifts quickly to the north. The good thing about this storm is how fast it's going to be moving. So it's going to be in and out, but just if you time it wrong, you can get stuck on the roads or stuck at the airports. We do have one flood watch that is up. The Philadelphia area, New Jersey, a good chunk of New Jersey, good chunk of Delaware, a little portion there of Maryland. Urban areas is the biggest concern if we do get that 3 inches, especially if a lot of that rain comes in a hurry. In Florida, urban flooding possible. In Miami, maybe around Jacksonville. I mentioned the Charleston threat. You flood whenever you get heavy rain anyways, and then you have the coastal flood threat at the same time, so that's why we're concerned with water levels there. Then as we move up the coast, just about everyone's going to get 1 to 2 inches. Isolated, could get up to 4, especially in the mountainous areas, heading up towards the Poconos or in the Catskills or into the Berkshires there of western Massachusetts. Other concerns? Now, this won't be till late Monday and then through Tuesday. As this storm exits, some cold air whips in behind it. So if you have Monday travel plans near Lake Erie or Lake Ontario, heading through the mountainous areas of West Virginia, that's where we could see some snow issues, but we'll deal with that. That's 4 or 5 days away. And then we did mention the chance of the West Coast. Everything's kind of quiet. We paused this at Sunday at about 8 a.m. You notice the storm just off the coast with some heavier rain. Then as we go throughout the day Sunday, it's kind of quiet, and then the moisture really picks up as we go to late Sunday into early Monday. So I think most of the weekend's going to be okay on the West Coast. But if you're in the Bay Area here, Monday morning is when we're going to have the biggest travel concerns. And then as we head through Monday to Tuesday, the same areas are going to repeatedly get the rainfall. So we'll be watching this closely for the West Coast friends. But that's the story for next week. Back to you, Stephen.
Protests are breaking out in Tel Aviv tonight after the IDF announced they mistakenly killed 3 Israeli hostages during their military operations in Gaza. Israel saying those hostages were incorrectly identified as threats by troops on the ground in northern Gaza. No word yet, though, on how exactly that error actually happened. We are, however, learning a bit more about those victims. Yotam Hayim and Samer Talaka were both kidnapped from their kibbutzes by Hamas back on October 7th. The third hostage, Alan Shamriz, was abducted from Gaza City that same day. Meanwhile, the divide between Israel and the U.S. here seems to be growing as well. 2 U.S. officials telling NBC News that the Biden administration wants to see Israel's large-scale operations in Gaza come to an end, and that move to a more targeted, calculated approach instead, something Benjamin Netanyahu's camp has made clear they are not ready to do yet. NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson joins us now from Tel Aviv. So, Hallie, what exactly happened here? Do we have any idea how these hostages were misidentified?
I mean, not at this point, Stephen. It is a good question because it is the central question here as it relates to what has gone on and what we have learned about from the Israeli military. It is not clear whether these hostages perhaps escaped, whether these hostages perhaps were abandoned, whether these hostages had been trying to, for example, speak Hebrew or identify themselves as people who had been held in Gaza at that point. So clearly there are so many questions here, and the Israeli military and the Israeli government is going to have to address those at some point. Right now, though, it is a moment of sorrow here in this country. That's how you heard the prime minister frame it, calling this essentially an unbearable tragedy, saying that the country is in mourning tonight, essentially. And I will tell you, there is also some real anger, too. We were at those protests in Tel Aviv that you mentioned, that demonstration with other hostage family members, Stephen, and people are extremely concerned about where this goes next.
Yeah, Hallie, I've been watching your coverage today, marching alongside those protesters, talking to them about what exactly they're asking for. What did you hear from them?
Listen, I think from the folks that we talk to, and specifically people who are family members of people that are either held or, in one instance, and you're about to hear from him, somebody whose cousin had believed to have been held, and just 2 days ago was on a list of hostages confirmed dead, essentially. So he had gone, he had buried his cousin today. It is late in Israel. It is basically the pre-dawn hours here, but he decided that he wanted to come out to this demonstration overnight that shut down some of the streets around what's called Hostage Square to be able to essentially use his voice and to try to add to the chorus to put pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to negotiate some kind of a release for these hostages ASAP. Let me play for you what he told me.
My cousin was, now we know, killed on October 7th. He went out to defend his home in Kibbutz Nir Yitzchak, and we didn't know anything about him until two days ago. His body is still kidnapped by Hamas. He's still there. So today we buried some remains. His family had to acknowledge that he's not coming back. His wife they had 3 kids. His wife is 4 months pregnant. He would have a son that will never know his dad.
So just one of the many people that were out there tonight, people that we talked to, the question of where this goes next, right, is about this idea of the potential for maybe another temporary truce, like what we saw a few weeks ago that led to the release of dozens of now former hostages. We know that more than 130 are believed to be held in Gaza, Stephen.
And Hallie, I have to ask, I can't get over families of these hostages. They've been talking about and fearing this exact thing happening for weeks. Israel accidentally taking the lives of hostages there among Hamas, or they're being held in Gaza. Is this situation at all thought to be something that could force Israel to be more cautious moving forward?
I think that's one of the open questions here, right? I mean, I think that's one of the things that we will see play out over the course of the next 48, 72 hours, the way that the prime minister responds to some of the questions around specifically what happened. Same thing with the military there. I will say you have seen that pressure from the Biden administration pretty clearly, very firmly continuing to hug Israel, demonstrate support for Israel, and back its essentially campaign against Hamas, broadly speaking. Tactically, though, this is where some of the differences come in. So you are seeing now, and I was there with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan this morning as he was talking about his meetings here in Israel. He was obviously, of course, in the West Bank as well, meeting with the head of the Palestinian Authority. But he was talking about how the U.S. At some point wants to see Israel shift to something that is more precise, more targeted, that is what we understand to be fairly clearly the expectation that has been laid out based on what multiple sources are telling our teams behind the scenes. Publicly, of course, the National Security Advisor has said timelines. And listen, that would be broadcasting next steps to Israel's enemy here, essentially. So the specificity isn't to the level that you may see reported, et cetera. But the bottom line is, at some point, the U.S. wants to see very clearly Israel move to something that is more targeted, that is more precise, partly because of the humanitarian crisis that is just getting deeper and worse in Gaza, Stephen.
Important coverage. Hallie Jackson, thanks so much. And staying overseas, tonight, an exclusive interview with Russian Press Secretary Dimitri Peskov by our Keir Simmons. Together, they discussed the U.S.'s involvement in the war in Ukraine amid the upcoming elections and whether or not Vladimir Putin would be open to peace talks or maybe another hostage exchange. Here's NBC's chief international foreign correspondent Keir Simmons with more.
Tonight, Russian President Vladimir Putin's spokesman weighing in on the upcoming U.S. elections, calling for dialogue despite Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
President Putin would like to see someone who is more constructive towards our country.
Could the Kremlin work with President Trump?
I have no doubt that President Putin will be ready to work with anyone who is ready to work with him.
It's illegal in Russia to call its special military operation a war. But Dimitri Peskov says
it is a war. It is a hybrid war that actually the United States is orchestrating against our country.
Saying Russia will still win, even with more U.S. aid for Ukraine.
This is a great mistake of Washington, actually.
But you accept that so far, America's funding and its weapons has been one of the crucial factors that has prevented Russia from reaching its goals.
It's making the story longer.
One independent polling organization tells us half of Russians now want peace talks, though most would not give up territory.
To return back the territories is treated like a surrender.
And on Americans, Paul Whelan and Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who the US say are wrongly detained.
President Putin is always interested in a deal.
They are hostages to the deal you want to do, aren't they?
No, they're not hostages. They're in custody.
As for detained American journalist Alsu Kamasheva, the Kremlin not saying whether she would be part of any proposed deal.
Keir Simmons, thanks so much. Well, don't go anywhere. We are just getting started. Fentanyl is now Los Angeles County's deadliest drug, accounting for nearly 60% of all overdose deaths. So what is being done about it? Plus, are you sick with COVID, the flu, or maybe just the common cold? Well, it's getting really hard to tell again these days. What you need to know ahead of the holidays. And speaking of the holidays, the travel rush, it has already started. Yes, really, with 10 days to go until Christmas.
I think we're getting out early enough. I think we're beating the rush. Yeah. So I'm not too worried about it.
Me either.
Welcome back. Here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. Virginia mother Deja Taylor has been sentenced to 2 years in prison for felony child neglect. This comes almost a year after her 7-year-old son used her gun to shoot his teacher. Last month, Taylor was sentenced to 21 months in prison for a different charge of using marijuana while owning a gun, which is illegal. Republican leaders have selected lawmaker Mazi Pilip as their candidate to replace ousted New York Congressman George Santos. Pilip is originally from Ethiopia and served in the Israeli military. In February, she will face off against Democratic former Congressman Tom Suozzi in a special election for Santos' former seat. A recent Carnegie Mellon graduate is suing the university over alleged discrimination and anti-Semitism. This complaint alleges that a professor made anti-Semitic comments and that she was denied a homework extension when she asked if she could attend a vigil for victims of a 2019 synagogue shooting. The suit comes as colleges and universities face growing criticism over their ability to make Jewish students feel safe during the Israel-Hamas war. An overnight explosion left some New Yorkers without power, causing transportation issues and even trapping some people in elevators. A short circuit at a Con Edison substation in Brooklyn led to that outage. Power was restored to all customers by 3 a.m. And today, Melania Trump made a rare appearance welcoming new U.S. citizens at a naturalization ceremony at the National Archives. She spoke about her own experience becoming a U.S. citizen and the many hurdles immigrants have to overcome to secure citizenship. Well, a stunning statistic out of Los Angeles. Fentanyl is officially the county's most deadly drug, surpassing methamphetamine. The synthetic opioid was responsible for almost 60% of all accidental drug or alcohol overdoses in 2022. That's according to a report from the LA County Department of Public Health. In San Francisco, the outlook is similarly grim. Overdoses there are set to exceed the previous record held in 2020, with more than 80% of them attributed to fentanyl. Joining us now is Dr. Gary Tsai, the director of the LA County Substance Abuse Prevention and Control. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Tsai. So how does this fentanyl problem seem to be getting worse and worse? We've heard so much about it now for a couple of years, and it continues to worsen.
Yes, tragically, our fentanyl overdose deaths are at the highest they've ever been. We've seen increases over the last 5 years or so as fentanyl has increasingly been found in both the illicit drug supply as well as in counterfeit pills, so that people who are accessing pills they think are perhaps prescription medications actually contain fentanyl.
Well, and we can't overlook the racial disparity here. In LA specifically, there's that racial disparity when it comes to fentanyl deaths. Do we know at all why this is?
Well, the overdose numbers do disproportionately impact Black populations. There are a number of particular reasons why that may be. Unfortunately, Black populations do disproportionately represent people experiencing homelessness, although the proportion of Black individuals in Los Angeles County is less than 10%, they comprise over 30% of our homeless population and over 20% of our overdoses. And we know that people who are experiencing homelessness do sometimes use drugs alone, which is a very high risk factor for fatal drug overdoses.
So problems compounding on one another. And now the difficult question here that so many communities are asking, what can be done to combat this? What can be done to stop this?
It's incredibly important for us to take a comprehensive, multi-pronged approach to address this issue. Downstream, we need to enhance our treatment options. We have evidence-based medications for addiction treatment that we know can help. We need to get as much opioid overdose prevention medication called naloxone out in the community as possible, and to find ways to engage people who traditionally haven't been interested in substance use treatment. Addiction's unique in that the majority of people with the condition are not interested in services, and we have to do a better job of figuring out how we can better engage them. Also investing in harm reduction services, things like syringe exchange, overdose prevention centers, and medications are incredibly important. And then upstream for prevention in terms of investing in youth, ensuring that we're creating opportunities for them to connect to meaningful activities, establish meaningful relationships, so that we're creating alternatives to substance use.
So many important measures that so many cities across the country are looking at as this problem continues to grow. Dr. Gary Tsai, thanks so much for that insight.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's that time of year when it seems like we all know someone who's sick, and that's because there's an alarming rise in multiple viruses around the country. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky has more.
Are you experiencing any flu-like symptoms?
It's a scene playing out in clinics and hospitals nationwide, prompting an urgent warning from the CDC behind troubling new numbers. The agency alerting doctors flu hospitalizations have spiked 200% over the last 4 weeks. Hospitalizations for RSV and COVID surging as well. A wave of respiratory illnesses officials say is currently spreading fast, especially through the South.
How confident are you these cases are going to keep going up?
I'm 100% certain cases will continue to go up post-holidays.
At her Charlotte hospital, infectious disease Dr. Katie Passaretti told us it appears distrust of COVID vaccines is impacting other shots as well. As of last week, the CDC says only about 40% of children and adults have gotten this year's flu shot. The adult COVID vaccination rate barely breaking 17%.
It's really terrifying to me that we're coming out of a pandemic with even lower vaccine rates than we were going in.
Another concern, holiday gatherings exposing new patients.
Sorry.
That doesn't sound fun.
It doesn't feel great.
We met Tracy Mullen on her way to the doctor.
I probably should have come sooner.
But tonight, the message from doctors, better late than never. While it typically takes 2 weeks for vaccines to be fully effective, in a flu season like this one,
at some point I have to close the door and say I can't see any more patients today.
Any protection could be crucial to keeping family close this holiday season. Morgan Chesky, NBC News, Charlotte.
I keep hearing people cough all over the place. Got to watch out there. Well, coming up, this year's holiday travel season could break some records. What you need to know if you were hitting the road or hitting the sky. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Here are some of the stories happening out west that we're following. The cause of death for Friends star Matthew Perry has been released. The LA County Medical Examiner says Perry died of acute effects of ketamine. The coroner releasing the results today, ruling Perry's death an accident and noting Perry was undergoing ketamine infusion therapy to treat depression and anxiety. Perry was found unresponsive at his LA home back in October. And take a look at this, an explosion in Northern California. Police got calls about a suspicious object, some sort of pressure cooker. It happened outside a Sacramento place earlier this week. The unusual device was in fact some type of explosive, as we see there. A bomb squad evacuated that area and was able to safely detonate it, creating quite a big fireworks show. And right outside San Diego, U.S. Customs officers found an interesting shipment. They discovered more than $10 million worth of narcotics. Turns out that was all hidden in, get this, barrels of jalapeno paste. Officers inspected the truck at the Otay Mesa cargo facility on Wednesday. A canine actually found the drugs, which happened to be meth and cocaine and not jalapenos. The driver was handed over to Homeland Security. Well, officials have decided to go ahead with the demolition of the home where 4 University of Idaho students were murdered a little more than a year ago. Demolition is set for December 28th, well before the suspected killer is set to go to trial. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett has more on how this development could affect the upcoming court case.
Hey there, the families of the victims want that house, as painful as it is, to stay up at least until the man accused of that grisly crime that took their 4 children can stand trial. But the school clearly decided that in a case with no trial date set, they can't wait any longer.
It's a haunting reminder of an unthinkable tragedy, but soon the house at 1122 King Road will stand no more. The University of Idaho announcing plans to demolish the house on December 28th. Its president saying in a statement, while we appreciate the emotional connection some family members of the victims may have to this house, it's time for its removal and to allow the collective healing of our community to continue. The family of victim Kaylee Gonsalves responding to the news on Facebook, writing in part, Kaylee unfortunately died in that house, but more importantly, Kaylee lived a fun, happy life in that house. When the house is torn down, it will be a very sad day for me. Teams from suspect Brian Kohberger's defense visiting the house Thursday and returning today, telling the university they intend to take photographs, measurements, and possibly gather drone footage of the house in preparation for Kohberger's trial, which still has no trial date. It was inside these walls that Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogen, and Kaylee Gonsalves were found stabbed to death in November of 2022. The victims' families have called for the house to remain standing throughout the impending trial.
The house is evidence, probably one of the biggest pieces of evidence.
The FBI went to the house in late October. The university saying they asked to gather information that will let them create a physical model of the home for trial so prosecutors can map out what they say happened that night. A knife sheath, police say they recovered from the bed where Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Mogen were found dead on the 3rd floor of that home. Prosecutors allege that Kohberger's DNA was a statistical match to DNA taken from the knife sheath. According to court papers, one of the 2 surviving roommates was in her own bedroom on the 2nd floor, where Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin were killed. She told police she saw a man in black clothes and a mask walking past her, and that she stood frozen as that man walked toward the sliding glass door leading out of that house. Meanwhile, the University of Idaho campus turning a new leaf in the new year.
We are there for one another. We care for one another. We support one another.
As for Kohberger, a judge entered a not guilty plea on his behalf back in May, and he said through a former attorney he believes he will be exonerated. Back to you guys.
Well, we are officially 10 days away from Christmas, but before you get too excited, that also means the holiday travel frenzy, it is ramping up. Industry experts are saying this year could break records thanks in part to flexible remote work and more affordable airfare. AAA is expecting more than 115 million people to either fly or drive more than 50 miles from home. That's 2.5 million more than just last year. And if you're looking to beat the holiday rush at the airport and your flight happens to be scheduled for Thursday, well, you are out of luck. That is when the FAA says it will peak with almost 49,000 flights. Let's bring in NBC News correspondent Adrian Broadus from Chicago O'Hare International Airport with more. So, Adrian, I'm a little afraid to ask, how are things looking out there right now?
Steady right now. If you look at the security checkpoint lines, on average, the wait time has been between 5 and 15 minutes. Right now, it's at 15 minutes. Just moments ago, it was at 5 minutes. So we've seen it fluctuate throughout the day. And as you mentioned, next Thursday, the 21st, is going to be the peak travel day, according to AAA, with 49,000 flights in one day. We spoke with some travelers who said they don't want to be in the middle of that chaos. Listen in.
Today, I can already see the security line is a lot longer, so it looks a little more hectic.
I think we're getting out early enough. I think we're beating the rush.
And that traveler you heard from on the back end said he and his friend are leaving now. He's traveling to the UK. On the front end of his trip, he will work remotely. And that's what some other travelers are doing as well, not only working remotely on the front end, but on the back end of their trip, leaving a little earlier and coming back a little later. Stephen?
Some flexibility there, and not too bad right now. I'm going to resist saying pack your patience, but what should people do to try to make their trip as smooth as possible?
I won't say it either, and kudos to you for resisting that all too familiar phrase. But when you pack, after you have packed, arrive at the airport at least 2 hours before your flight is scheduled to depart. If you're traveling this holiday season with gifts, avoid wrapping the gifts in case TSA needs to look at your items. So what I plan to do, and what some other folks are doing, they're just going to take a gift bag. You can slide that gift bag in your backpack or in your carry-on luggage, and you can even stick your items inside if you need to. That way TSA can open and see inside and make sure your items are clear.
That is news you can use. That's good advice, better than pack your patience. But Adrian, I did want to ask, point out last year, there was so much chaos during the travel rush, particularly with Southwest Airlines. I was actually stuck in St. Louis for a while waiting on one of those flights. What has Southwest done to improve?
No one can forget what happened last year, especially those who were in the thick of it. When we're talking about Southwest, the CEO of the company has said they've increased the number of staff, so that will help people get to their destinations a little bit easier. They also have upgraded their technology, and they've added some de-icing equipment. Some other airlines, specifically United Airlines, has increased the overhead storage space. So people may be wondering why, after that meltdown last year, some travelers said they did not want to check luggage anymore, so they are taking their luggage with them, and United has increased the capacity for those carry-on items.
Well, I feel a little bit better about it, cautiously optimistic, thanks to you. NBC's Adrian Broadus, thanks so much. Well, the countdown to Christmas is on, and the deadline to send out your holiday gifts is approaching really fast. But no need to stress too much just yet, because there are still some ways to get your gifts under the tree in time. NBC's Marissa Parra has more.
Hey, Stephen. Well, the good news is it's not too late. It just depends on how much you want to spend on shipping. Now, we'll get to that in just a moment in terms of those deadlines. But let me use my prop here to give you an example of some do's and don'ts when it comes to shipping your box off. So, of course, you want to make sure you're using a sturdy box. You want to make sure it is sealed properly, like this one. When it comes to shipping labels, though, of course, you want to double check, triple check that it is to the right address, has the correct zip code. But I did learn something from our other correspondent, Vicki Wen, which is you can not only put it on the outside, which is what you expect, you can also put the shipping label information on the inside in case your box gets damaged. Now, in terms of those deadlines, FedEx ground shipping, that deadline is today. The good news is if you can't make it by the end of business today, there is still time. Again, you just have to pay more. So same day shipping, that deadline until next Friday. UPS 3-day select deadline is Tuesday the 19th. Ground shipping, sorry guys, I do not have an exact deadline for you because that's going to depend on the package itself, how heavy it is, where it's being sent from, where it's being sent to. You can check the UPS website for that. And then USPS, say you want to send that holiday card to your friends, your family, your loved ones. The ground shipping, that deadline is tomorrow. Now I want to bring back my box because I want to show you something. This is a 5-pound box. If you were to do the very bare minimum of shipping, ground shipping for this would run you about $30. If you were to wait until the very last minute, and again, we're trying to get things on time for Christmas. Christmas Eve is on a Sunday, so everything's a little bit more crunched for time. Getting this on time at the last second would run you $260. So listen, if it's not enough motivation to get your things on time and early just to make sure your friends and family have them, then let the hit that your wallet takes be motivation itself, Stephen.
I do not like that motivation. Marissa Parra, thanks so much. Well, still to come, a victory for Prince Harry, a court agreeing that his phone was indeed hacked by a tabloid newspaper. That story and others trending around the world are next. But first, you got to see this one. At first, it looks just like a normal Christmas tree, but one Kentucky family got quite the surprise. Inside that tree, they found an owl resting in between the branches. The little Houdini managed to go undetected for 4 days. The family even decorated the tree without seeing him. He was actually discovered by a worker who was there to clean the carpets. That worker, Bobby Hayes, he stepped up. He was able to gently remove that owl and release it back in the woods. Must have been a hoot. Get it? We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's take a quick look around the world. Prince Harry won his battle against Mirror Group newspapers. A judge ruled the British tabloid hired private investigators and illegally hacked the prince's phone. This win is part of Harry's larger fight against press misconduct and illegal intrusion. Danish shipping firm Maersk denied Houthi claims of a drone strike on a vessel heading for Israel. They did confirm a missile incident, but said the vessel was not, in fact, hit. The Houthis, who are based out of Yemen, warned that there might be future attacks on other ships. This tension in the Red Sea, all part of the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East. In Bosnia, 7 former members of the Bosnian Serb wartime army were arrested for their suspected roles in the 1995 Srebrenica massacre of 8,000 Muslims. They're accused of participating in the shooting and killing of about 800 Muslim victims. Denmark is holding 2 people in custody and says 4 others are the target of a terrorism investigation. These line up with the arrests of 3 alleged Hamas members in Germany for planning attacks on Jewish sites. Danish authorities say they can't confirm the suspects they're holding in custody have links with Hamas. An American artist and activist was reportedly kidnapped and killed during a trip to Colombia. He was last heard from on Sunday when he called his family asking for thousands of dollars. We spoke with a family who are now searching for answers after this tragic loss.
Tonight, the family of a Minnesota man desperate for answers after they say he was kidnapped and killed while visiting Colombia.
I'm out of words to describe. I don't even know how I feel right now.
50-year-old Tujer Zhang, an artist and activist, had been traveling in South America when he called his brother asking for money while on a date Sunday night.
This time he was like, hey, do you have a couple of thousand? I was like, yeah, no problem. When do you want it? He said, I want it now. I'm in this bit of a situation here. I go, yeah, I can do that.
His family growing more fearful when Zhang stopped responding to texts.
Woke up in the morning at 7 a.m. I text him back and say, hey, I thought you said you need money. You still want the money? Text me back if you still want the money. No answer.
According to a local prosecutor, Zhang was kidnapped during a date and killed when he could not make the payment. His body later found in a wooded area covered in stab wounds. His family still searching for answers about how this shocking crime unfolded.
I was confused. To be honest with you, I don't know why, what the motive is.
Zhang had visited Colombia in the past, posting photos and videos to social media as recently as October with an unidentified woman.
I'm with my girl.
A refugee from Laos, Zhang and his family moved to St. Paul when he was a child. In recent years, he became a well-known comedian and community activist. Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar issuing a statement saying in part, quote, "This is a heartbreaking tragedy. Tujer was an incredible person who was constantly working to uplift his community."
He truly believes in equity work and fighting for the underprivileged. And many times I always tease him. I say, you know, you're not getting paid. Why are you doing it? But it's what motivates him.
A tragic loss made even more confounding by the mystery that still shrouds his final moments.
And he'll draw everybody in. That's the type of people he is.
Heartbreaking for that family, looking for answers. We've also heard from Minnesota Senator Tina Smith. She says she's been in contact with the State Department and the family, hoping to help however she can as well. Well, before we go tonight, a sweet Christmas tradition dating back 125 years. We're going to show you the craft of candy cane making in tonight's 60 Seconds of Joy. So stay tuned. And before we go, we're going to leave you with a little 60 Seconds of Joy straight from Candyland. Reporter Sydney Roel has more.
This is my sea turtle. Oh, yeah, can I see it? Yes, the head.
Every December, the Fudge Factory of Anna Maria Island is infused with the scent of minty candy canes. Using his grandfather's recipe and original equipment, Peter Vrignos and his son make candy canes just as they did in 1898.
I brought this original marble table with me. That's how important it was.
People gather in store or peer through the window to see the show.
I have not seen anything like this before, no, but it's really fun to see Christmas in Florida and just show something fresh and new that hasn't been done before.
Vrignos says no two candy canes are alike, and they aren't like the typical store-bought ones.
They're probably 10 times bigger. One of our candy canes will last a whole day.
Is it different to a normal candy cane?
It is, and it's superior.
But beyond their superior taste,
It's the head.
friends and family can gather to create their own uniquely shaped candy cane just in time for the holidays.
Very cool. That's going to do it for us tonight. I'm Stephen Romo. We'll see you Monday, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.